you want to have a purpose in life, like a purpose to set us against the suffering, then you have to be aiming at something where success is a possibility. And that opens up the landscape of success and failure. And there's pain associated with that. It's in responsibility that most people find the meaning that sustains them through life. It's not in happiness. It's not in impulsive pleasure. Those things blow away at the first ill wind. But to adopt the responsibility for your own well-being and to try to put your family together and to try to serve your community and to try to seek for eternal truths and to live them, that's the sort of thing that can ground you in your life enough so that you can withstand the difficulty of life. And when you tell people that, especially when you include yourself in the audience, let's say, and you're not finger waving from above, then everyone knows that it's true. And life is a very difficult process, and it's not you're not prepared for it unless you have the capacity to be dangerous. That doesn't mean that you should be cruel. It doesn't mean any of that. There's a statement in the New Testament, the meek shall inherit the earth. But the meek isn't well translated. It means something more like those who have swords and know how to use them but keep them sheathed will inherit the world. That's a way better way of thinking about it. You have to be powerful and formidable and then peaceful, in that order. Right? And that's not the same as being naive and weak and harmless, which is what young men are being encouraged to be. It's like, that's a very bad idea. It's a very bad idea. Because naive, weak, and harmless means that you can't withstand the tragedies of life. You can't bear any responsibility. You'll end up bitter. And when you get bitter, then you get dangerous. You don't divide the world into victim and oppressor and then assume that all the moral virtues on the side of the so-called victims. It's an extension of the infant predator narrative as far as I can tell. Now, you're either an infant or a predator. Well, that's just not a good way of conceptualizing the political world. There's an entire literature, psychoanalytic literature, on the dangers of overcompassion, hyperprotectiveness, helicopter parenting, all of that. When you have children, you have to encourage them. You have to encourage them to take risks because they have to grow up and take their place in the world. You can't protect them too much because if you do, you destroy them. That's the motif of Hansel and Gretel, right? Two kids lost in the woods. They find a gingerbread house. That's a little bit too good to be true, right? It's not only shelter when you need it, but it's candy. What lives inside the house that's too good to be true? The witch that devours you, right? That's excess compassion. If you're incapable of violence, not being violent isn't a virtue. People who teach martial arts know this full well, right? If you learn a martial art, you learn to be dangerous, but simultaneously you learn to control it. Both of those come together. And the combination of that capacity for danger and the capacity for control is what brings about the virtue. Otherwise, you confuse weakness with moral virtue. I'm harmless, therefore I'm good. It's like, no, that isn't how it works. That isn't how it works at all. If you're harmless, you're just weak. And if you're weak, you're not going to be good. You can't be, because it takes strength to be good. It's very difficult to be good. So look, every society has its tyrannical aspect and nothing is perfect. I definitely believe that the West's idea that the individual is sovereign over the group is the greatest idea of mankind. I truly believe that, and I think it's metaphorically and literally true. And I think that if you don't treat yourself that way, and you don't treat the people immediately around you that way, and you don't base your society on that principle, that all hell breaks out very, very rapidly. I have a rule in my book, which is Rule 8. It says, tell the truth, or at least don't lie. And it's really the last part of that, I think, that's better because, well, what the hell do you know about the truth? The truth is a very complicated thing. But people can tell when they're speaking deceitfully. You can tell now and then that what you're saying is actually a lie. It's a very good idea not to do that. There's a deep idea that's embedded in the biblical corpus, what we do call the narrative foundation of our culture. And the idea, it's laid out in Genesis, two fundamental ideas. And one is that whatever God is the force that uses truthful speech to transform chaos into habitable order. That's the fundamental idea, and that order is good. If truthful speech is used to generate the order, then the order is good. That's proposition number one. Proposition number two is human beings are made in the image of that power. And those propositions are correct, like they're correct metaphorically, they're correct psychologically, they're correct on multiple levels of analysis simultaneously. And so if you lie, then you warp the structure of reality. We know this. This isn't some metaphysical doctrine. The great scholars of the totalitarian systems of the 20th century, whether they are on the right or the left, point very, very directly to a relationship between the individual's willingness to subvert their own speech and to speak known lies and the totalitarian excesses of the state. Those two things are directly related, causally. There is individual truth. There's no doubt about that. I mean, you have your own experience and you can relate that in a way that's unique to you, but that doesn't mean that we don't have to inhabit a truth that's universal simultaneously, because otherwise we can't stay in the same place at the same time. There has to be an overarching conceptual framework that we all agree on, or we can't exist peacefully. So if you don't want us to exist peacefully, then you can demolish the overarching framework and let everyone revert to their own personal truth. But all that means is chaos. You can't even run a household that way. I mean, you have your desires and what you need in your household, and so does your wife and the rest of your family members, but you have to engage in continual dialogue to organize that into something that's collectively inhabitable. But I think what you do, to some degree, in your workplace and wherever you are, is you consult your own resentment. You will be asked to operate privately and productively under strictures that you can't really tolerate, that make you angry, bitter, resentful, out for revenge, because you're not allowed to exist in the manner that you know is appropriate. You have to repress that and shrink away. It makes people very angry and bitter. And so you have to decide, when people put unreasonable strictures on your behavior, whether or not you're going to put up with it and shrink, or whether you're going to take the risk of saying something and push back against that encroaching, let's call it politically correct tyranny. Inequality is a painful reality, right? And every system that we know generates inequality. It's a real problem, because there's no evidence that you reduce inequality by doing that. It doesn't help. Like, we don't know how to reduce inequality. And laying inequality at the feet of the capitalist world, or at the feet of Western society, is ignorant almost beyond comprehension. Inequality is a way worse problem than that. And you might say, well, we don't want there to be success because there has to be failure. And that's a problem. That's the inequality problem. But is that really the case? Is you want to eradicate success as part of the price you pay for eradicating failure? No one lives that way. People might say that's what they want, but no one lives that way, because if you eradicate success, then you have no impetus for action. What are you doing? You acting so that you'll fail? Is that your motivation? Well, if you want to be motivated, which means if you want to have a purpose in life, like a purpose to set us against the suffering, then you have to be aiming at something where success is a possibility. And that opens up the landscape of success and failure. And there's pain associated with that. But that doesn't mean we eradicate the hierarchy of value itself and leave no one with anything to do. It's a terrible doctrine in every way. And it's mostly motivated by resentment.